right at this exact moment, there's a ship moving through the Arctic. It's flying the Russian flag. It's an icebreaker. The bow of the ship is reinforced with massive, thick steel. It doesn't just push through. It literally crushes and plows right through blocks of ice weighing tens of thousands of tons. And in the wake of that ship, a new sea route is being born, out there in the freezing, empty ocean. It is carving out a path all by itself. Why? Because that path is money. No, actually, it's not just money. That path is global hegemony, the quietest, yet most dangerous competition of the 21st century is happening right now in the Arctic. You don't see it on the evening news. There are no gunshots, no explosions. But the outcome of this quiet competition could very well dictate the world order for the next century. That is our story today. Mine is first. We need to look at exactly how the Arctic is changing. If you look at the scientific data, the Arctic is warming at roughly 4 times the global average. The surface area of the summer sea ice has shrunk by nearly half compared to the 1982. Now, is this an environmental disaster? Absolutely. Polar bears losing their habitat. Rising sea levels. We all know that story. But that is not the story I want to tell you today. I want to talk about what gets exposed when that ice melts. 2 things: sea routes and natural resources. Let's look at the sea routes first. Right now, if you want to ship a cargo container from Asia to Europe, how do you do it? You go through the Suez Canal. You start in Singapore, cross the Indian Ocean, go up the Red Sea, squeeze through the Suez Canal, cross the Mediterranean, and finally hit Europe. Do you know how far that is? From Busan, South Korea, to Rotterdam via the Suez route. It's about 20,000 kilometers. It usually takes between 25 to 30 days. But what if you take the Arctic route? It's about 13,000 kilometers. The distance drops by 35%, and it shaves off over 10 days of travel time. The daily fuel cost to run a massive container ship is astronomical. Shaving off 10 days is a monumental cost saving. Multiply that by the entire volume of global shipping, and you are talking about trillions of dollars a year. So, why haven't we been using the Arctic route all this time? Because it was blocked by ice, except for a few months in the summer. Navigation was physically impossible without a fleet of icebreakers holding your hand. But if the ice melts, the route opens up. The window for year-round navigation gets wider. In a few decades, regular cargo ships might just casually sail right through the Arctic during the summer. So, who controls that route? That is the million-dollar question. There are basically 2 main Arctic routes. One is the Northern Sea Route and SAR, hugging the Russian coastline. It connects Europe and Asia along the coast of Siberia. The other is the Northwest Passage, cutting right over the top of Canada through the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Out of these 2, the one that is opening up way faster and is far more viable right now is the Russian one. The Northern Sea Route. This route along the Siberian coast is actually already seeing decent traffic during the summer. But here's the catch: Russia officially claims this route as its own internal waters. Do you know what that means? It means if you want to use this route, you have to get permission from Russia. You have to hire a Russian pilot to board your ship, and you have to pay a toll to Moscow. Russia literally wants to control a global shipping artery, exactly the same way Egypt controls the Suez Canal. Minus now. Let's talk about resources. Do you have any idea what is buried beneath the Arctic Ocean? According to estimates by the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, the Arctic could hold about 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and a staggering 30% of its undiscovered natural gas. 13% of all undiscovered oil, 30% of all undiscovered gas on Earth. It's an astronomical amount. Up until now, nobody could touch it, because it was locked under miles of ice. Drilling technology was too difficult, and the environmental conditions were just too extreme. But when the ice melts, it becomes accessible. Resource extraction becomes a reality. So, Whose resources are they? That right there is the absolute core of the quiet war happening in the Arctic. Do you know which countries physically border the Arctic? Russia, Canada, the US via Alaska, Norway, and Denmark via Greenland. These 5 nations sit right on the Arctic Ocean. They formed an international group called the Arctic Council to discuss Arctic issues. But there is one massive player who is not on that list. China. China does not have an Arctic coastline. Geographically, they are absolutely not an Arctic nation. But do you know what China calls itself? Near Arctic state. They officially coined this term in a white paper back in 2018. Near Arctic state. That concept literally does not exist in international law. China just made it up. Why go through all that trouble? Because if the Arctic sea route opens, China stands to be one of the absolute biggest beneficiaries. The distance from Chinese megaports to Europe gets slashed. They cannot afford to sit back and let other countries control that artery. So China built Arctic research stations. They built their own icebreakers. They literally set up a research facility right next to Norway's base in the Svalbard archipelago. Quietly, persistently, they are wedging their foot into the Arctic door. Minus, we need to talk more about Russia. Russia's presence in the Arctic is completely overwhelming. Over half of Russia's entire coastline borders the Arctic Ocean. Roughly 20% of Russia's entire GDP comes straight out of the Arctic region. Natural gas, oil, nickel, diamonds. The resources in Siberia and the Arctic are the pillars holding up the entire Russian economy. And Russia holds the largest fleet of icebreakers in the world. Not just regular icebreakers, nuclear-powered icebreakers. Russia is the only country on Earth that operates them. Every single active nuclear icebreaker in the world right now belongs to Russia. And right at this very moment, those ships are out there plowing through the Arctic routes. Russia holds the ultimate home field advantage in the Arctic. And the more the ice melts, the more valuable that advantage becomes. It's a bizarre paradox. Russia is one of the countries most at risk from climate change, yet they are also the country poised to profit the most from it. When the Siberian permafrost melts, it releases massive amounts of methane, accelerating the global climate disaster. That's terrible for Russia. But at the exact same time, the Arctic routes open up, and the resources under the ice are exposed. That is a massive opportunity for Russia. Disaster and opportunity are sitting on the exact same sheet of ice. Minus August 2007, a very weird incident happened. A Russian expedition took nuclear-powered submarines down to the seabed directly underneath the North Pole, and at 4,200 meters below the ice, they planted a Russian flag. It was made of titanium, so it would stay there forever. The gesture was loud and clear. The seabed under the North Pole belongs to Russia. The international community scoffed at it. The Canadian foreign minister famously mocked them, saying, "This isn't the 15th century. You can't just go around the world and plant flags to claim territory." But Russia didn't care. They've been continuously pushing their territorial claims in the Arctic ever since. There's an underwater mountain range passing right under the North Pole called the Lomonosov Ridge. Russia officially claims that this ridge is just a natural extension of their own continental shelf. If the UN recognizes that claim, a massive chunk of the Arctic Ocean legally becomes Russia's exclusive economic zone. But Denmark is making the exact same claim. They say the ridge extends from Greenland. Canada is making a similar claim too. 3 countries pointing at the exact same underwater mountain range saying, "That's mine." Right now, it's quiet. But the moment the ice melts a bit more and commercial drilling becomes viable, nobody knows how this quiet dispute is going to explode. Minus, and we can't forget the United States. Honestly, America is lagging way behind in the Arctic, thanks to Alaska. The US is an Arctic nation, but they are severely lacking in icebreakers. While Russia boasts a fleet of over 40, you can count the number of medium to heavy US icebreakers on one hand. Since the Obama administration, they've been trying to beef up their Arctic strategy. But due to budget constraints and shifting priorities, it kept getting pushed to the back burner. Remember when President Donald Trump said he wanted to buy Greenland? A lot of people just wrote it off as a completely absurd, crazy rant. But if you look at it through a geopolitical lens, it wasn't actually that crazy. Greenland is the largest island in the world. It directly faces the Arctic Ocean. The US already has a critical military base there through Lair Base. If Greenland ever falls under the influence of China or another rival power, it blows a massive hole right in America's Arctic defense strategy. Trump's delivery was incredibly blunt, but the geopolitical logic behind it was absolutely real. And even now, heading into 2026, America's strategic interest in Greenland hasn't disappeared. If anything, it's gotten stronger. That is a massive signal of just how critical the Arctic is becoming. Mine is, there is one single thread connecting all of these stories: climate change. Up until now, when we talked about climate change, what language did we usually use? We used the language of the environment. The glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising, ecosystems are collapsing, the polar bears are losing their homes, and all of that is true. It's incredibly important. But geopoliticians, they read climate change in a completely different language. Routes are opening, resources are exposed, territorial claims become viable, new military bases are required. A brand new war for global hegemony has begun. Climate change is an environmental crisis, yes, but it is simultaneously a massive geopolitical event. For every single centimeter of ice that melts, someone, somewhere, is drawing a new line on a map. If you look at what's happening in the Arctic, literally everything we talked about from part 1 to part 7 converges right here. In part 4, we saw Russia's 200-year obsession with reaching a warm water port. The Arctic route is the ultimate, brand new outlet for that compulsion. As the ice melts, Russia's northern coast finally warms up. In part 5, we saw China's Malacca dilemma. If the Arctic route opens, China can completely bypass the Strait of Malacca. That is exactly why Beijing is obsessed with the Arctic. The fight over untapped oil and gas ties directly into the resource curse we covered in part 6. This could easily spark a brand new kind of resource war. And at the very foundation of all of this is the terrain, the location, the map. Minus, let me ask you a very personal question as we wrap up. When you hear news about climate change, what do you feel? Worry? Helplessness? Or maybe you've heard it so much that you've just grown numb to it? When I talk about this story, I feel something else. I feel terror. But it's not just the terror of environmental destruction. It is the terror of human nature, the terrifying reality that the speed at which superpowers rush to build military bases on a newly exposed land might actually be faster than the speed the ice is melting. The fact that even in the face of a literal planetary crisis, nations look at a warming globe and see an opportunity to conquer, rather than a reason to cooperate. That is what terrifies me. The melting of the Arctic ice is a matter of science. But who claims the water that gets left behind? That is a matter of geopolitics. And the answer to that geopolitical question won't be decided by science. It will be decided by human choices. Depending on the choices we make right now, the Arctic could become the shared future of humanity, or it could become our next major battlefield. We are standing at that exact crossroads right now. Standing on the ice. Minus all right. We have finally reached the end of this series. In part 1, we looked at the flat plains of Ukraine. In part 2, the microscopic semiconductors in the Taiwan Strait. In part 3, the brutal, straight-line borders of Africa. In part 4, Russia's 200-year obsession with a warm water port. In part 5, China's claustrophobia inside the island chains. In part 6, the tragic paradox of how oil buys out democracy In Part 7, how the towering Himalayas severed two incredible civilizations for thousands of years. And here in Part 8, on the melting ice of the Arctic, all of those stories came together into one. So what do you see now? Here is what I see. Humans change their ideologies. They change their leaders. They overthrow their systems. They constantly rewrite history. But humans cannot change the map. We cannot move mountain ranges. We cannot fill in oceans. We cannot build natural fortresses on flat plains. And because of that, history rhymes. It's not that the exact same events repeat themselves perfectly. It's that different protagonists, standing on the exact same terrain, end up operating on the exact same logic. What the Tsar wanted, the Soviet General Secretary wanted. And what the General Secretary wanted, the President wants today. The wars fought over coal evolved into wars over oil, which evolved into the struggle over semiconductors. And now, the race to control the Arctic shipping lanes. The props change. The map does not. So if you truly want to understand how the world works, you shouldn't just read the news headlines. You need to look at the map. The true grammar of the world is written right there on the map. The moment you start reading that grammar, the entire world looks different. Wars look different. Diplomacy looks different. The global economy looks entirely different. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the series. The fact that the Earth writes history, the fact that destiny is literally embedded in the map. As long as you remember that, you will always be able to read the world just a little bit deeper. Open a map. Start right there. Always.